Hello, class. Today we're going to go over Chapter 7, which focuses on growth in trade and exports. One thing to keep in mind is when a country's economy grows, we usually assume that growth is always a good thing. But in international economics, growth doesn't automatically mean better outcomes. In today's lecture, we'll see how the type of growth matters, not just the amount. We'll examine how growth changes what countries produce, what they trade, and how the global prices respond. Sometimes in ways that actually reduce national benefits. And we'll through the reading, we'll see that. And we'll also connect these ideas to technology, uh, exports, and real world examples that you'll see in today's global economy. And by the end, you'll understand why trade and growth is a strategic choice, not just a goal. So, and when we look at it, we say, well, what kind of growth is there? Well, we have economic growth, which expands a company's productive capacity and which we represent as an outward shift of the production possibilities curve, or the PPC. The key question isn't just that the economy grows, but how it grows. And does growth occur evenly across industries, or does it favor one sector over another? And what impacts does that have? Now, we care about growth because growth patterns affect what countries produce, how they trade and what they trade, and how they benefit from international trade. One real world example that we can look at recently is India's recent growth, that their overall GDP expanded rapidly, and growth was biased towards services and digital industries. World famous India call centers. That's kind of one thing that people think about, and just digital application. A lot of engineers can get a lot of work done by farming it out to engineers in India who work at a greatly reduced rate can deliver services for you. Their growth has not been in manufacturing as what was typical in the past, and this affects India's export profile. Keep that in mind. What you're exporting. It increases the service exports while limiting gains in goods exports, and how that affects overall GDP. Now, here's we have a chart on. It's looking at balanced growth bias towards cloth production or wheat production. We're going to use those two as W wheat, C is cloth. Graph A, if you look at it, it denotes balanced growth. And the x-axis denotes the cloth, and the y-axis the wheat. So there are four plots. S1, which is at 20 and 80, and S2 at 28 and 112, C1 at 60 and 40, and C2 at 84 and 56. They're all plotted out. You see two decreasing curves that are drawn in the graph. The first curve begins at 0 and 85 and ends at 60 and 0. And the second curve begins at 0 and 120 and ends at 84 and 0. A descending line is plotted, which passes through S1 and C1. Another descending line is plotted, which passes through S2 and C2. So graph B denotes the growth bias towards cloth production. If you look at it, where is the bias for what you're exporting, what you will be exporting? And the x-axis denotes the cloth, and the y-axis denotes the wheat. Four plots are lined out and plotted. You get two decreasing curves that are drawn in the graph. And the first curve begins at 0.85, ends at 60.0. The second curve begins at 0.100 and ends at 80. So a descending line is plotted, which passes through S1 and C2. Another descending line is plotted, which passes through S3 and C3. And graph C denotes the growth bias towards wheat production. So the x-axis denotes the cloth, and the y-axis denotes the wheat. There are 4 plots lined out. So you have 2 decreasing curves again as you continue to look at how this is affecting. So when you look at the growth bias towards wheat production, this is where you look at the third curve. So you're like, wheat, which one of these is the most productive? This is the way we graph it out to look at it. And you can see that there is a bias towards a cloth at some point. And when you're looking at balanced and biased growth, growth does not always come from technology. That's what we mentioned about the example previously. It can come from changes in the factor endowments, like increases in labor, capital, or land. You can see that when you're in some manufacturing environments. China used to be heavy with labor, and now it's capital and technology. And when only one factor grows, economic theory predicts very specific changes in output across industries. One real world example that we try to think about is Canada's expansion of skilled immigration that increases the labor in skill intensive industries, which influences how goods and services are expanding. The expansion favors proportionally one or more of the products. So when we think about the PPC, it'll be skewed towards a faster growing product. And this is a fun one, right? The Rybczynski theorem. As you got through your reading, you'll see that it states that if product prices remain constant and one factor grows, output of the good that uses that factor intensively will increase, and while output of the other good would decline. The result surprises you. If you look at it, growth in one factor can reduce output in another sector. And when you think about it, where do we have examples of that we could look at it? Automation investments in the United States logistics have increased capital intensity. So capital intensive warehousing expanded while labor intensive operations decline or are relocated offshore. A lot of industries are trying to find as many opportunities to automate in logistics and to use technology to make it more effective. There are warehouses, for instance, if you look at the Amazon facility, there's a lot of automation in place where there are R2 units, and we've covered this in a couple of other lectures and topics of how they move product where people used to be moving the product. They have an automated R2 unit which moves pallets and puts them up and puts material away, picks it, and really the human interaction there is ensuring it's done accurately. And if there are challenges where something's put out of place, to make sure that we step in and make sure that product is moved correctly and safely. The automation is taking over in a lot of the newer facilities. So here's a graphic representation of the Rybczynski theorem. The X denotes the cloth and the Y denotes the wheat. The two plots, they're plotted. You have two decreasing curves that start from approximate point 0.90 and 0.92, and then at the points approximately 0.50 and 0.60 respectively. When you look at the arrow that's placed between the two curves, the arrow is located towards the lower region of the curves and points from the first curve to the second curve. So there are two decreasing parallel lines are plotted which intersect the curves at S1 and S2. And that helps determine, what we want to have happen with the Rybczynski here. It just proves it out visually. So what happens when a country changes its willingness to trade? As production consumption change with growth a country's willingness or interest in engaging in international trade could be impacted. As a change willingness to trade, it's desire to export import. It can increase or decrease based on profit, right? This matter changed because in trade, volumes can influence world prices, especially for large economies. And China is slowing domestic demand in 2024. It reduces imports of raw materials, which impacted global commodity exporters like Australia and Brazil. They weren't shipping much out to China. So when China slowed its demand, it affected world economies. And we've seen that a couple of times, even recently with our trade wars with China. As the U.S. was importing more, China was exporting less. So then they said, well, the raw goods that they were bringing in, they had to decrease. So that's where you get what is the willingness to trade is export and import more, decrease when you just export and import less. It's pretty straightforward. And you can look at examples over the last year where countries have said, well, we're not going to be exporting, so they start reducing their imports if that is their primary way of getting raw materials, and that starts changing other countries or large scale. Small economies, it won't have that big a deal. So when we look at the effects on a country's terms of trade, the impact of growth depends on whether a country is small or large in world market. A small country can influence big prices. It's not going to make a big difference whether they're importing or exporting more. They're primarily promoting. So the large country like the United States and China, and to some extent the European Union, they affect international prices through changes in trade behavior. And those changes determine whether growth raises or lowers their welfare. And the European Union's agricultural policies influence global food prices due to its size. They import a lot of food into the European Union from partner countries. So when you're looking at that, there's a more agricultural than an impact on the other industrial markets. So when we look at the growth towards replacing imports in a large country, if growth reduces a large country's reliance on imports, for internal growth, global demand for those imports falls, and that lowers import prices and improves their terms of trade. That's what always happens. Well, like for instance, you can see it in the oil industry when there was heavy investment in drilling in the United States, and that term drill baby drill, we started saying, well, we're going to drill more. Well, we started reopening the drilling and doing more internal drilling of wells. It in fact impacted oil prices, and United States exports increased, and it drove oil prices down because we were flooding the market, right? And that was one thing that it gave a certain benefit for output. We were shipping more than we had, and the lowers. This is a good example of how the growth bias towards replacing imports in a large country can impact the world. Think about that when we're going through the U.S. expansion of its recent semiconductor production under the CHIPS Act. It's reducing reliance on imported chips, and that's strengthening our bargaining positions in global trade markets when we're looking to buy chips, because where we're purchasing from now, we're getting a better bargaining point for imports, because when we when our infrastructure gets up and running, people will hopefully in the world influence would drive those prices down. Similar, like I said, with the oil and gas industry. And here's just another graphic representation of it, so you can look at it and see. And it's again the wheat and cloth example. The decreasing line denoting price. You see that where 2/3 over wheat divided by cloth is plotted, which passes through S1, and another decreasing line 1 is wheat cloth is plotted, which passes through S6. These two curves are drawn in the graph, and the first curve begins, and the second. The values are approximated, remember, but you can start to see visually how impacts are made to make this determination. So when we think about it, we have growth that increases a large country's willingness to trade. What does that mean? Growth that expands export supply or increases import demand can worsen a large country's terms of trade. Export prices fall or import prices rise, and whether the country's better off depends on whether production gains outweigh trade losses. One example is Brazil's expansion in soybean exports recently. They increased global supply, and that lower prices and limited income gains for farmers in the U.S. despite our higher output, because in trade challenges, the world economy was buying less U.S. soybeans, and recently this turned around because we've negotiated better deals, and soybean prices are rebounding to a bit, and it's benefiting farmers in the U.S. Initially, it did not. So when we look at measuring growth, it's rare, but it's important. It's a theoretical possibility where growth makes a country worse off due to a large deterioration in its terms of trade. And we just have seen that, as I just previously mentioned. Even though we were growing, we were doing well, but the terms of the trade weren't beneficial. So it challenged the assumption that growth is always beneficial. As we said earlier, it's not always better for you. If there's growth in industries, sometimes there's too much and it starts driving prices down. Exporting is impacted. And like we talked earlier, oil exporting countries that rapidly expanded production during weak global demand, they had falling revenues despite higher output. What was beneficial is you've got to find the trade-off. Where is the break-even point where I can export more and maintain our profit levels? As this principles exports is kind of financed to get you to understand what drives some of the import and export rules and regulations. What's going to make it worthwhile. And so here's something to look at, some crucial conditions. There are 3 conditions must hold. Growth must strongly expand exports. Foreign demand must be price inelastic. And the country must be ready to be highly trade dependent. If you're going to do large exports, you got to be ready to make it beneficial for other companies to do business with you. So when you think about it, some African commodity exporters, they faced inelastic demand and heavy trade dependence. That made them vulnerable to price collapses. So if you get used to, we're going to ship a lot and the price is going to be driven down or kept down, that sometimes happens in the oil market, and their vulnerability happens. Say, hey, a new partner like OPEC increases its oil output production, That's going to drive the price down. Some countries where that's their main source of revenue, well, they're going to be impacted negatively. Now, that's why you have that partnership of OPEC, where they try to control the price by saying we're only going to deliver this much, or we are or not, and that helps keep the price at a steady window where it's like, hey, it's not too high, not too low, and we can make the right amount of profit, and it controls what's coming in and out of the country. And here's another graph that illustrates that. Not to go into too much detail, but it's the same concepts as the previous ones. It's just how can we see it? When growth and this is a large country, how it works. So we break down. Let's look at technology and trade. What is it? Well, technology differences, they create cooperative advantages, right? As we know, it can increase across different countries based on size. Countries that innovate at different rates, shaping trade patterns over time. This means a technology-based trade can complement or compete with some other challenges, according to the HO model. And in other ways, technology differences can be consistent. They with how you see the world. One example is South Korea's leadership in the memory chip technology drives its export dominance, despite what they have. They have labor costs that are larger than other countries, and that's why chips is important in the United States, because it's going to drive down labor costs by the use of technology and make us more competitive, because and it's also what China is doing right now with a lot of their manufacturing infrastructure is automated and use of technology, moving away from using a big labor force. They're kind of redirecting their labor force to other efforts. As we are trying to do in the United States with our investments in infrastructure for manufacturing. Those are not just based on labor. We're looking at how can we improve our labor force to technology. And that will ultimately benefit us as we export, because we can export probably at a lower price or higher quality. And then that's the difference that our customers just have to make a decision on what they want, our partners. And then we have individual products in the product cycle. So according to the product cycle hypothesis, new products are invented and produced in high income countries, and then production shifts to lower cost countries as technologies mature. Because they're initially started off, as we've seen in the United States throughout the years, we'll start off, we'll do the R&D, the investment, and we'll start the manufacturing, and then we say, well, let's move it into another part of the world where we can control the manufacture through technology advances, and we control the product cycle. So, and the real world example is smartphone production. In the United States, we were in the U.S. and Europe, and then it started to shift to East Asia, and now in Southeast Asia and India, there's a lot of smartphone production, and China, of course, Apple's. But they did not all start in foreign countries. It was here in the United States, and but as opportunities came up, well, we moved it offshore, offshoring. And that's one of the things that we have to look at in the supply chain: when, where, how we're going to make products. And then, of course, this is the one thing: openness to trade affects growth. That's always it, right? That's one thing's been in the news recently. How open are we to trade? If we're willing to make the deal no matter what, well, that usually increases your growth rate for the country. And I think that's one thing that when we look at the overall big picture, our willingness to trade with people is there. It's a matter of, are we going to create a balanced trade partnership? It can't be all one way where because we have money to spend, we're going to go on and pay or higher, put higher costs on other countries. And it also comes back to us because we have money spent. We don't want to put that extra money into importing. So that's why when you can make a balance, and we're getting into the global economy, it's kind of getting to that point where we can work out better deals. One thing with Vietnam is an example. They have an openness to trade. They really will absorb manufacturing technology from anybody who's willing to invest. They're going to take it, and that's kind of where the United States has been. Let's invest. Let's invest. And it drove rapid economic development in Vietnam, and we're in that boat again. It's like a resurgence of, hey, let's get back into manufacturing. Let's get back into the trades. Let's get back into making a difference. And as that continues to happen, we'll see how that unfolds over the next year. Our GDP, how has it been in comparison to years in the past? Is our exports up and imports down? That's one thing that we look at pretty closely, and that's that when you're looking at planning and logistics supply chain, you want to know what is our forecast, and that's kind of, we've had a lot of uncertainty this year because of speculation, but as it's leveling out, we should see improvement. So, in summary, as we wrap all this up, transportation technology, it integrates the information systems, equipment innovation, emerging tools. All together, these technologies, they drive a cost efficiency, which gives us service reliability, sustainability, security. And in regards to transportation, that continues to evolve. Technology remains a key source and